To support us in providing more, subscribe to the channel now. At the time of writing this story, my sister Kelsey was going through an incredibly tough time. A time I never imagined we would face as a family. It all began when Kelsey started dating a guy for a few months. For privacy reasons, I'll call him John. But what was happening between them was not just a typical romantic relationship. In the beginning, things seemed somewhat normal between them. However, as time went on, Kelsey became involved with John in illegal activities. I wasn't aware of the specifics, but there were some conversations I overheard about their involvement in questionable matters. I never expected things to escalate to the dangerous level they eventually did. One day, John suddenly decided that Kelsey was stealing money from him. No one knows why he felt that way or how he came to that conclusion. He called her and asked to meet him at a local store. Without hesitation, Kelsey went to meet him. And instead of driving her own car, she left it in the parking lot and got into his. This is when the story took a serious turn. John started driving around town, but he wasn't talking in a normal manner. His speech was erratic, filled with anger and accusations. He told Kelsey that he loved her, but he felt she was doing things he didn't like, and he was dissatisfied with her behavior. Then, out of nowhere, he pulled out a gun and began to threaten her with it. At that moment, Kelsey sat next to him, feeling an overwhelming sense of fear. Things took a turn for the worse when he demanded she get out of the car and go into a nearby store to buy him cigarettes and alcohol. Kelsey knew that things could explode at any moment, but she had to stay calm and think carefully. Once inside the store, she tried to think quickly about what to do to save herself. All she could think about was calling our mom. She opened her phone and made a swift call to her. During the call, Kelsey couldn't directly state what was happening, but she began to say unusual things. She told our mom that she loved her and hoped everything was okay with the family. These words were enough for our mom to realize something dangerous was happening. Kelsey's tone wasn't normal, and her voice trembled in a way we hadn't heard before. Our mom summoned my cousin, who was at our house at the time, and without hesitation, we rushed to the store to retrieve Kelsey's car. Our goal was to bring the car back so that our mom could go pick Kelsey up from where she was with John. When our mom arrived at the store, Kelsey managed to stall for just long enough to avoid any escalation from John. Once our mom got there, Kelsey got into the car with her, and they sped off as quickly as they could. However, the story didn't end there. As our mom and Kelsey tried to escape, John began to chase them in his car. It was like a scene from an action movie, but it was all too real for us. John started shooting out of the window of his car while swerving recklessly to catch up to them. They were driving at 60 miles per hour in a 25-mile-per-hour zone, running red lights as they were shot at. Kelsey was on the phone with the police, pleading for help. As they approached our house, it seemed like things might finally settle down. The police were just around the corner, waiting for Kelsey and our mom. However, before John gave up and stopped the chase, he decided to turn back toward our area. He reached the alley behind our house and began driving in a threatening manner close to our home. My cousin and I were inside, feeling scared and anxious about what might happen to us with him around. We watched from the windows, unsure of what John would do next. Fortunately, he eventually left. When we were sure he was gone, Kelsey and our mom returned home with a police escort. The police advised us to leave the area for the entire night, fearing that John might return and cause more harm. As a result of this incident, Kelsey was forced to move to a completely different state. It was a difficult situation for her and for all of us. That time was one of the hardest periods we experienced as a family. My mom and I still live in the same house, and we haven't encountered any further issues with John since then. But Kelsey had to leave everything behind. This was a terrifying experience for all of us, especially for Kelsey. I never imagined something like this could happen to us, but life is full of unexpected surprises. As I write this story, my 21st birthday has just passed a few days ago, but what I'm about to tell you happened last week when I was still 20 years old. I went through an experience I never imagined I'd face, and to be honest, I still feel scared and anxious. Before I begin, I'll be changing all the names for privacy reasons. My name is Spencer, and I am a transgender man. I work at a rest stop on the road, where my main job is to clean the bathrooms and keep the place tidy. This job may not sound exciting, but it provides me with a steady income. Over the past few months, I've worked with several colleagues at this station, but there was one in particular named Kevin, who became the center of the problem I'm about to share with you. Kevin was known among us for having a severe drug addiction, which clearly affected his behavior at work. Although I was aware of his issues, I never thought things would escalate to the extent they did. Last week, I arrived at my usual shift, only to find that Kevin had just finished 2 consecutive shifts. He was tired and worn out, which made me feel a bit uneasy. Kevin had accidentally taken the office phone home. We, as employees, are not allowed to take the office phone with us. It's part of the rules. When I realized the phone was missing, I called Kevin and asked if he had taken it. He admitted that he had taken it by mistake and promised to return it when he came in for his night shift. To explain, at the rest stop where I work, there's an alarm system in the lobby that goes off when the phone rings. No matter where the phone is, you can always hear the alarm if you're in the building. This feature is helpful, but that night, it became a major source of frustration. After a while, the alarm started going off continuously and didn't stop for almost 5 minutes. The sound was loud and extremely irritating, making me anxious. About an hour later, the alarm started ringing again without stopping. At that moment, I wasn't sure what to do. The phone, which was causing all this commotion, wasn't even in the building, and the alarm kept ringing non-stop. So I decided to call my supervisor and inform him about the situation. I explained how the phone was missing and how the alarm wouldn't stop. He told me that he would contact Kevin and ask him to return the phone immediately. About half an hour later, Kevin returned to the station and put the phone back in its place. But he wasn't calm or understanding of what had happened. On the contrary, he was extremely angry. He looked at me with a sharp glare and in a loud, furious voice said, "You, Spencer, you idiot." At that moment, I was shocked. I calmly asked him what I was supposed to do in such a situation. The phone wouldn't stop ringing, and I had no other option but to call the supervisor. But Kevin wasn't listening to me. He started yelling hysterically, accusing me of ratting him out just because I had informed the supervisor. His tone was intimidating, and his eyes were filled with rage. It was clear that Kevin was consumed by anger at that moment. What made matters worse was that I knew Kevin had a history of assaulting others. I had heard stories of other coworkers being attacked by him in the past, and I knew he wouldn't hesitate to act violently if he felt threatened. I didn't want to be the next person he assaulted, so I made the decision I thought was safest at that moment. I called the police. A police officer arrived shortly after and spoke with me about the incident. I explained what had happened and how I felt threatened. The officer was understanding and told me he would speak with Kevin that night to try and calm the situation down. The next morning, around 6 o'clock, I received a Snapchat message from my coworker, who I'll call Bridget. In the message, she warned me that Kevin was very angry and that he said he was planning to confront me or maybe even hit me. That wasn't the only thing that worried me. In the same message, Bridget told me that Kevin had called me a fake man, referring to my transgender identity. That comment was incredibly hurtful for me, as I felt humiliated and discriminated against because of who I am. This threat was serious, especially since it came from someone known for his aggression. So, I decided to contact the police again. I spoke to the same officer who had visited the night before, and I told him about the threats I had received and the gender-based discrimination. But unfortunately, the police response wasn't as strong as I had hoped. The officer told me they couldn't do much about the threat and that the best they could do was transfer Kevin to another building away from me. And that's exactly what happened. Kevin was moved to another location at the station. I wasn't satisfied with this outcome. I felt that Kevin should be held accountable for his actions, so I decided to take an additional step. I went to the office I work with and filed an official complaint against Kevin. They told me they would call him in for a meeting to discuss his behavior. But that wasn't enough for me, so I contacted the local sheriff's office and requested to file charges against Kevin. Once again, the response was disappointing. The only charge that could be filed was a minor harassment charge. As for the gender-based discrimination, I was told it was considered a civil matter, and I would need to speak to a lawyer about it. So far, this incident hasn't been resolved in a way that satisfies me. I still feel anxious, constantly watching my surroundings in case Kevin tries to attack me. This might not seem terrifying to some, but for me, it was a harrowing experience. I never imagined I would find myself in such a situation, which is why I feel so scared. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to my story. If you have any advice on how to handle this situation, I would greatly appreciate hearing it. I was raised by my grandparents in New Zealand. They owned a business in the islands, and as a result, they had 20 employees. One of them, who all call Rex, Rex's father, was adopted by my grandmother's father. After Rex's father died, Rex became close to my family, and he would do jobs here and there, and my grandfather would pay him. My mother lived in the islands due to some legal issue. I never had a good relationship with her or my half-sisters that I was raised with. This is relevant to what I will detail later. I was constantly bullied by my half-sisters because I wasn't their real sister. And if I were to complain to the adults, no one really took me seriously. One of my sisters and I would accompany my grandparents to the islands. And on one of these occasions, my sister led one of her boyfriend's friends into the house. where he then forced me to get intimate with him. I was only 12 years old at the time. I was encouraged at that young age that it was cool to lose your virginity and to keep doing it with friends, who would tell me good job making me feel as if it was a great thing. I didn't tell any adults because I thought that no one would listen to me, and because of my small brain, it was supposed to be cool. These are all relevant to my story. Regarding Rex, my life eventually fell apart and I got into drinking and smoking. My grandparents made me stay in the islands with my mother, who had abandoned me when I was 2 months old on one occasion. One of my stepdad's friends broke into my room while drunk, and he tried to do you-know-what to me that night. I remember him shushing me as my stepdad then knocked on the door to check if I was all right. I used this opportunity to leap to the door and dash out. My stepdad found him and then pushed him out of the house. As I was crying on the couch, my stepdad explained to my mother what had just happened. My heart dropped when I heard my mom ask him, "Are you sure that she didn't bring him in herself and then just pretend as if he came in on his own?" To which my stepdad replied, I'm pretty sure. She's crying on the couch. Everything I went through was ignored and not thought of. So I was always scared to tell anyone what was going on. Rex was unmarried, kless, and illiterate. I remember one incident when I was young that he tried to force me to sit between his legs. I was only 6 years old at the time. I remember that he tried to kiss me, and I ran away at 13. I was way too young to smoke, and so I used to hide at the back of our house and smoke. Rex found out about this and began to give me his smokes. He would tell me that I should smoke first, and then he would finish it, because he said that it felt like he was kissing my lip. He would constantly break into my room at night and steal my undergarments, and then he would replace them with new ones. He also told me a few times that I shouldn't wash them after I shower more than once. We would sit together while smoking, and I would move as far away from him as I could. He would purposely put a hole in his pants and let his you-know-what hang out, and he would tell me to look at it. He told me that he would masturbate and think of me. I was so scared to tell him one, and I just kept it to myself, seeking comfort in the wrong places and people. One day after I had a shower, I went to get changed in my room. My room is next to the kitchen, and I knew that there was a hole on the top part of the wall, a very small one. I was never worried about it, though, because one, it was way too high for someone to just look through it. One would have to stand on the counter and tiptoe to see through it. And then two, I never thought anyone would go through all that trouble. So I slowly got changed because it was quite hot that day, and then I noticed the hole in the wall was now blocked. I thought nothing of it because anyone could have just patched it up. I had heard my stepdad walking toward the kitchen at the same time, and then the hole appeared again. I thought that was strange, so I just stared at the hole. I heard my stepdad walk out, turn the car on, and then drive off. To my horror, something had blocked the hole in the wall. I legit realized that it was an eye looking right at me through that hole. I grabbed my towel and then rushed to the kitchen to then find Rex staggering down from the bench, acting like nothing had happened. I grabbed a knife and then threatened him with tears. Welling in my eyes, I told him that if he ever did that again, I would kill him. He then just smirked, and I then walked off to put on my clothes. I had heard knocking on my door, and As I opened, Diddy just stood there glaring at me. He then forced himself inside and he told me he was done playing around that. I should just lie down and give him what he wanted. As you can imagine, I stood there horrified. I was so emotionally and psychologically damaged. I was only 13 while this was going on. Something inside me was saying that maybe, if I were to give him what he wanted, he would finally leave me alone. But then I looked at him properly and in the face, and I just felt so disgusted. I yelled at him, and I told him if he didn't get out that I would tell everyone what he was doing to me. He smirked and then walked out again. He knew that my mother would always be on his side at all times. My life kind of spiraled out a bit, and I had no understanding of what depression really was. I just fell. My life was ruined. So I kind of just let myself go in regards to smoking, drinking, and unfortunately sleeping in places and with people that I should not have been sleeping with or at, mostly because of their ages and marital status. I was once dating this dude who was 13 years older than me. I know, and I'm sorry, it was really stupid, and I was 16. I felt unloved, and I was looking for someone who could possibly love me back well. I was talking to him late at night behind my house. I saw a big block of wood across our heads. I then glanced in the direction where the wood came from, and there stood Rex, huffing and puffing, holding a machete, ready to fight the guy that I was talking to. I walked inside the house, and my grandmother was devastated, saying that I was a suspenseful, and I'm an embarrassment to the family. Well, the next day I cried to them, and I told them that I think I was like this because of what Rex did to me. My grandmother just responded by then saying, "Oh, what, he just slaps your butt? That's it," to which my anon says, "Well, you were caught with a dude before, and Rex didn't do anything to you until after that happened," which was a completely different incident. That happened when I was 15, so the one time I was going to open up to them, I was pushed aside. He would disgustingly leave graphic magazines in my room. He would come into my room early hours of the morning and then stare at me sleeping. This went on for about a year or two. Rex also tried to do similar things to my younger sister, but my mother and stepfather made sure that he wouldn't, which kind of made me mad because I felt like they could have done the same thing for me, but didn't. I was taken back to New Zealand when I was 15 after I ran away from home. The neglect that I felt from my mother and her husband was real, and I went to go live with my cousins and their family, where I actually felt that I was more accepted. Once I came back to New Zealand, I had picked myself up. I went back to high school, aced my grades, and I started working at 17. I wanted to help my grandmother pay for my school fees, my lunch, and etc. My best friend from the islands had introduced me to my then boyfriend, and now husband, of almost 4 years. I'm actually currently in university. I believe in America they call it college, and I'm a second student. My husband and I have our issues mostly financial, but the love that I get from him, I've never gotten in my whole life. We're just a young couple trying to succeed in life. I truly believe that if it weren't for the grace of God, I wouldn't have made it this far in life. I know this story is long, but I thought I would write it down for those who experience the same thing and also feel as if they have no one to talk to. One thing I've learned growing up was to always speak up and to never give up. Someone will eventually understand, stand and listen to you. As for Rex, he actually still works for my grandmother on the Highlands. He's 58 now, and he was about 50 when he started to sexually harass me. He still has no wife or children or any family of his own, but my grandmother still shelters and cares for him. I forgive him and everyone else who's done me wrong, but the events definitely impacted my mental state of mind. I'm currently trying to work on my short temper, as well as sometimes overthinking and jumping to conclusions. I'm extremely antisocial, and I'm sometimes overly protective over my younger siblings. I was extremely suicidal until my husband came into my life. At the time, I was cutting myself. And until recently, I've slowed down a lot. I've invested a lot of my time in my spiritual life, and having someone to support me through my recovery journey has been a real gift from God. Rex video calls my family members every now and then, but I try to avoid talking at all. I swear, every time I even hear his name, I can't help but have flashbacks of everything he's done to me. I know this isn't your typical scary story, but these experiences were truly scary. For me, I've been sexually assaulted, bullied, and unloved within the family, and now things are finally looking up for me. The relationship I now have with my family is getting better, and they're much more supportive now. Well, except for my mother, who just calls to ask for money. But that's a story for another day. I suppose, please everyone, if you happen to go through anything similar, speak up. I promise, eventually someone will listen. When I was 13, my life reflected the nature of an old Gen X kid in the 90s. I lived in an old farmhouse that was about a mile away from a strip mall that included a 7-Eleven, where I would meet up with friends who were just as broke as me. We used to wander around the mall, sometimes shoplifting and sometimes just browsing through things at Target. Typical suburban kid activities. Those moments were filled with the spirit of youth, where I enjoyed small adventures despite the challenges surrounding me. The most direct route from the mall to my house was a busy main road that stretched from the highway into farmland. Our old house was situated in a remote area, right at the border between the town and rural land, and the distance became more isolated as I got closer. I was used to seeing fields on my right and a flower nursery on my left while walking along the shoulder of the road, where there was hardly any sidewalk. One summer day, after a bit of youthful mischief, I was on my way back home. Having reached about 5/7 when I was 12, I looked slightly older from a distance. I had long blonde hair and blue eyes, which made me appear like a 15-year-old despite still being a kid. On that particular day, a blue Camaro pulled up next to me. Inside was a greasy Latino man who looked to be in his late 20s or early 30s. He called out, "Hey baby, wanna ride?" That was a disgusting pickup line, and it wasn't the first time I had faced such a situation. I ignored him at first and kept walking, but he called out again, "Hey baby, do you want to ride with me? Come on, get in." He leaned over to open the passenger door. Seizing the opportunity, I ducked around the back of his car and crossed the street behind him. I knew my house wasn't far, just about a quarter-mile away, but this man followed me, trying to grab me, attempting to push the door in my path. He was thinking of anything he could do without getting out of his car. The next road I needed to take was much less busy, but this meant that the risk for him as a driver would be much lower if he decided to jump out of the car and grab me. I was growing more panicked as I approached my house, and when I didn't see my mom's Jeep in the driveway, it hit me that I would be alone. I considered whether I should run into my house and hope I could lock the door before he reached me. Weighing the risks of this creepy man knowing where I lived and whether he would eventually lose interest in me if I just kept dodging him and saying no. We didn't keep house keys, so who knew which windows or doors were actually locked? I decided against going home. There were a few houses further up the road in a small development, and I figured I could maybe duck into one of the unfenced backyards or hop over to one of the smaller ones to hide. There was also a small orchard I could disappear into. The man was becoming increasingly aggressive, pausing to try to grab me, yelling for me to get into the car. Any charitable intent he had started with had completely vanished. He was desperate to get me into his car, and it was clear it wasn't just for a ride. Fortunately, some of our neighbors were having a garage sale. I seized my chance and yelled, "Oh hey, that's my house." Then I ran as fast as I could to the house where the sale was happening. I didn't actually know these neighbors, so I was taking an additional risk. But I figured whatever happened to me, there would be way better than what the man in the car had planned for me. I ran up to who I assumed was running the sale and told her that a man was following me. He was idling just beyond their driveway, still lurking. I was then ushered inside and given a soda. I don't know if the owners of the house told the man to get lost, or if he thought it was my house, or if he sensed too many witnesses. Maybe all of the above. They told me to stay as long as I wanted, and even gave me a rug to take home. I stuck around for about half an hour after they promised the man was gone. I walked back home, still looking over my shoulder, but everything ended up being okay. I wish I could say this was the only time this happened to me, but it wasn't. Many men tried to pick me up as I walked. I didn't drive or own a bike, so walking and riding the bus were pretty much my primary modes of transportation. There were only a few others as aggressive as the Camaro man, but each time I managed to dodge them. Funny enough, I was rescued another night as an adult when I ducked into an adult video store and watched the creep on the CCTV cameras, pointing at the parking lot. For the love of God, it's fine to offer someone a ride, but if they say no, don't push it. Especially don't push it to the point where someone has to flee and then hide in garages and porn stores.